Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to the Bay Beyond the Bay Live. This is brought to you by the Bay Theater in Suttons Bay, Michigan. And tonight we're going to be discussing Man Godfrey. That's a wonderful film from 1936 with William Powell and Carole Lombard and a very good cast of characters. And tonight we're going to be discussing this with three of our panelists tonight. And the first panelist we'll introduce is going to be Kevin Maher. Kevin Maher is a film industry professional, and he's got over 20 years of experience working for major studios, including Disney, Fox, and Warner Brothers. And he also runs the top10filmlist.com blog and is a member of the Bay Community Theater programming team. Thank you very much for being with us today, Kevin. Next, we'll talk with Ted Kroll. Ted Kroll is a film historian. He taught film classes out at Trinity College and also started up a movie theater that is still existing today. He is now retired and is working and is glad to have him here, joining us as part of the Bay Community Theater programming team. So thank you for being with us today, Ted.
Glad to be here.
All right. Next, we have Rita Wessels. Rita is a retired school teacher, and she spent most of her life. She's been a film fan. And she started her career off in films, if you want to say it, in high school and through college, working part-time to help to get through college, and a little bit of time after college working in a theater, doing everything in the theater except managing it. All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today. And she's now still also a member of the Bay Community Theater's programming team. Well, thank you for being here today. So today, we're here to talk about Man Godfrey. And part of this discussion is what we want to do is have interaction and include you inside this participation. So if you notice either on the side of your screen, or on the bottom of your screen, you'll notice a comment area, a chat area. So I say a chat area. You can post in there and say hi to other people and talk about the film, or meet other people and talk about amongst yourselves about the film. And what we will do is we'll go through there and look for any questions you may have. So it can't only just be talking amongst yourself, but if you have a question you want to ask the panelists, please feel free to ask us. And we'll have our assistant in the back, White Fang, who is our background assistant, who will be monitoring the chat area and looking for comments from you and helping us as we move along. So that's how we're going to work today. All right. And just to let everybody know that the Bay Community Theater, we're all volunteers of the Bay Community Theater in Suttons Bay, Michigan. We're all volunteers for the Bay Community Theater, which operates it as a nonprofit. So the Bay Theater is operated by a nonprofit, and we're here all volunteering our time. So we appreciate it very much for you being here tonight, and also for those viewers who watch us later on. Thank you very much, and hope you sometime come to Suttons Bay and see us at the theater. Right. Well, let's get started. So, White Fang, do we have our first question for today? So, why is this film a screwball comedy? Let's start with Kevin on this one.
Well, the simple answer is it's 94 minutes at a breakneck speed. Sort of gives a first indication. But the second scene in the film, that is the auction scene, sort of sets the tone for the rest of the movie. It's complete chaos, and even Mr. Bullock, when chatting with someone, said it looks like an insane asylum, and Bullock's response is, all you need is an empty room and the right kind of people, and you have an insane asylum. And that's essentially what goes on in that auction scene right at the beginning. There you go. Then the next thing, of course, is all the characters are introduced the next day at the Bullock house, and it sort of furthers that idea of this mania, this madness that goes through everything. But where it goes from good screwball to great screwball, I think, is actually in the first scene, which is the meet cute between William Powell's character Godfrey and Carole Lombard's character Irene, where it sort of goes through a lot of their character attributes all at the same time. Sort of the mania of Lombard tempered with her soul searching, and then the cool aloofness of Godfrey that sort of grounds the entire film. But it's one of the best, if not the best, screwball comedies.
So Rita, would you like to say more on that?
Sure. I agree with what Kevin described, and also that it's the pacing is very quick. The dialogue is very witty. You really have to pay attention to catch all the one-liners. and the situation is quite ridiculous, and some of the scenes in the film are quite over the top, and that just adds to the comedy and the screwiness, the silliness of the whole thing to bring the audience some laughs in a ridiculous situation.
Oh, good. Ted, what's your comments on why this is a screwball comedy?
I'm not sure. Somewhere in the research or when I was reading about this or watching, I think it was Peter Bogdanovich, he was saying that actually the term screwball came from somebody characterizing Carole Lombard's performance, because she's so ditzy in this thing. I mean, it's just amazing that, just her dialogue and the way, she just seems so clueless at times, but at the same time, there's a lot of truth behind it, And as somebody said, this was Bogdanovich too, he was saying that American audiences just don't respond to the word farce. And that's what, traditionally you would call this kind of performance a farce. But when you call it a screwball comedy, then it's like, oh, good. It has a kind of a less academic and a more down to earth kind of appeal. But and there's what's it? This is his name, Carlo. Is that the guy's name? Yeah. When he jumps around like with being a gorilla, it's just the most outrageous thing I've ever seen. Every time I see it, it's just like, oh my goodness, this is crazy, And everybody's sitting there acting like, well, that's Carlo for you,
And when you go and talk about a little bit about the Carole Lombard's personality and everything else, there's talking about it. So William Powell was being offered this role and got the role from the director. And the director, they were talking about who would play the opposite. He said, you got to have Carole Lombard. Now, William Powell and Carole Lombard were married and had been divorced for about 2 years about the time this film came out. So they had been married and now they were divorced, and he's recommending his wife. And the director's like, why is that? And he says, well, because this character reminds me of my relationship and what I had to go through with my entire wife, with my wife. So I think that kind of supports kind of that attitude. And you really wonder, but also Carole was a very young person entering into films. And at this time it was made, she was like 24 years old or something like that. So I think that's just an interesting comment that you had also on that, an observation. Anything else about screwball comedies? Anybody else?
Well, Ted touched on it, but farce, and then you put it in American vernacular with it calling it screwball, taking it back to baseball, right? And that's sort of how that Variety reviewer had sort of thrown that in there to take the baseball metaphor a little further.
Because I like French farce. Farces are good. The French have a lot of farces. They produced on the stage and everything else, a lot of farces and everything else. And there was the fear also of having a foreign name to be used to describe an American film. So I think Screwball fits it very well. Anybody else? All right, White Fang, another question, please. Does this kind of comedy still work today? Kevin?
I would argue yes, but differently. We had talked in sort of our pre-show about comedy being meaner now than it was back then. But if you look at movies like The Hangover is a screwball comedy. Jim Carrey would be a screwball comedian earlier in his career. Melissa McCarthy does a lot of screwball. So there is still elements of screwball at work today. I think they're all derivative of what they did in the 30s and early 40s, where sort of the pinnacle of screwball comedy existed. But it's still certainly element of a lot of comedy today.
Anything else?
But I think it's different. Well, here we get in an argument here, or we're not a difference of opinion, but I just feel comedy today is just so mean-spirited and vulgar, and even though these characters are way out, even though they're pretty nutsy, they're adorable and they're lovable and that kind of thing, and at no point do you feel that they're being attacked or being put down? And I think that's part of the screwball part that's so great about these films, is that as eccentric and as far out as these people are, they still have some sort of individual characteristics, and you feel some sort of I don't know, sympathy is the right word, but at least you identify with them to a certain extent. So there's something missing in today's comedy that that was back then. It was more genteel back then, and it was just kind of out just funny. I mean, and situations were funny, and I don't know, it just had a different feel about it.
Yeah, I would agree with Kevin and Ted that the screwball comedy idea is still out there, but it's presented differently. It's a little, it's not as light and fluffy as the screwball comedies of the 30s. They're downright silly, and that's what makes them appealing and takes you away for that 90 minutes because they are so over the top and silly. I don't know if that will work as well today, but I would like to see someone try. That would be interesting to see that.
Well,
yeah, but that's the great word, silly. They're silly, and that's what's missing today is the silliness.
Well, with this, was this also poking fun at the wealthy by showing them in the manner they did? It's not Downton Abbey, Well,
I mean, I think that when you look at the wealthy, and this was very deliberate on LaCava and the screenwriter Maury Riskind, that they're silly, they're ignorant and harmless. They're not malevolent rich people, right? So in some movies of the 30s, you had we looked at It's a Wonderful Life in December, where you have an evil banker. And I think in this movie, in the Screwballs, there's more of a benevolence, just a stupid benevolence of the wealthy. So you can poke fun at them, but it's not mean-spirited either way. The rich aren't mean-spirited, nor is the comedy about them mean-spirited. It's all just sort of silly.
So what's the line in there that somebody was a spoiled brat, kind of? And then
that's Cornelia's the Park Avenue spoiled brat.
Yeah, it's a more elaborate line. And but then William Powell once says, that's me. That's what I was. And so he even though it's sort of very underneath the line, underneath the main line here, he's the one that's learning something about himself, that he doesn't have to be this the spoiled brat that gets everything his way. I mean, and he learned how to be, I guess humility is the word, he learned how to be humble and, how to help other people. And that's something he didn't have before. And that's what he got from, I'm not sure how it all works, but he says he got it from Carol Lombard, the Irene character, Well,
and he even says to Cornelia at the end that he calls her high-spirited, and that she should use her high-spiritedness, meaning that Park Avenue bitchiness, to better purposes than she has. And I think that's sort of the message to her is, there's a chance for redemption at some point.
It's Rita.
Yeah. So the very end, when they're almost at the happily ever after part, and Godfrey is doling out his gifts to each person in the living room, and Cornelia tells him, "Well, you won, and what did you learn from me?" That's who he says, "From you, I learned humility." And I think that ties back into the scene in the club where he tells Cornelia off and tells her, "You're just a spoiled brat," realizing that he himself was that kid too, but he has learned there's more to life than just being rich and spoiled and getting everything your way whenever you want it.
Right. So talking about also today's films, last year we ran that rom-com, because the question is, screwball comedies also work best because I believe, and it's been noted, that it's kind of like there's a romantic element in here. In this case, it's between Irene and Godfrey that's working, whether one's aware of it or not. The other one is sure want to be romantic. And the question becomes then, it's kind of like there's always some kind of a romantic end to it where somebody gets together. And I feel that part of it is that it's a way for, in that times with the way people wanted to see a movie, and the boy meets girl, girl meets boy, and eventually they go through something, they get together at the end type of thing. And also with the morals of the time period, that would be kind of a good solution for the movie. But when we look at today as romantic comedies, are some of the romantic comedies we have today screwball comedies? Rita, you brought up one in a discussion earlier this week.
Yeah, that's the one whose name I can never remember. It's with Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen.
Seth Rogen.
Yeah,
Yes.
where she was his babysitter at one point, and now she's
running for
some
office.
higher up in the government, and he's a journalist. And yeah, I see Kevin thinking really hard too. But that has the romantic element, and it has the very silly, over the top comedic elements as well. But I couldn't think of The Long Shot. Thank you. The Long Shot. But I couldn't think of any others that came around recently that have those lighter elements, because even that one has, danger and destruction and bullets and bad people. Mm-hmm. It doesn't stay on the light and fluffy side throughout.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say this to our discussion with the Lady Eve, but Groundhog Day has a screwball feel to it, and that's another movie that doesn't really attack. It has satire and that kind of thing, but it's still, again, it has the central character grows into being into humility and that kind of thing. So, but we'll come back to that one when we see the Lady Eve.
All right. Well, we've got some questions coming up from the audience there. From Amy. Hi, Amy. Thank you for joining us today. Did we ever learn why Godfrey was living on the street? Kevin?
Yes. Well, he had a terrible breakup with, in some places I've read it, they allude to it's his wife, but I thought it was his fiance, that he dumped all of his worldly goods to her and headed down to the river to die by suicide, but came across the ash heap where the forgotten men were living and took heart that if they who had nothing could persevere, then Godfrey Park of Boston, who had everything, should at least be able to persevere as well. And that's how he came to be living in the ash heap.
Rita, any more?
Yep, that's it. That's the summary.
Well, thanks, Amy. That was a good question, because you wonder that through the whole movie. So, well, how did this guy end up here? He says early in the film, he says, my real estate agent said it was a good place for my asthma.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
But my uncle has asthma too.
Yeah.
Right. Irene's got an answer for everything.
What I've found, speaking of Godfrey, though, I'm kind of interested that his demeanor never changes through the whole movie. I mean, he always has that kind of stiff approach to people, even to the very end. So he makes an ideal butler, but the only time he loosens up, of course, is when he gets drunk, and there's that whole thing in the middle there where he's kind of falling over everything. But other than that, even at the end, it takes it takes Irene to loosen him up to get married and that kind of thing. It's kind of interesting that he always stays kind of starchy through the whole film.
It's that there's sort of that detached element. So he has an active detachment, right? Because he's doing stuff behind the scenes. He's taking care of the stocks. He's setting up the dump nightclub. He's doing all these things that we don't see. He's cashing in the pearl necklace. So that's an active detachment. The dad has a passive detachment, right? All he does is stand outside and either comment, shake his head, or roll his eyes. And even to the end, right? He passively lets his company sink down to bankruptcy or being dissolved. So he's completely passive, and it's sort of two sides of the same coin, because they're both detached outsiders in the mayhem that the other four characters, cook up. The two sisters, Carlo and the mother. So I think that it is interesting, and I think Powell's performance, given the way the character was written, could have come off as arch and snide, but he doesn't. It's all with tenderness, that everything that he's doing, because you can sort of feel this stuff that's going on beneath the surface, and I think that's what makes it so enjoyable.
Well, throw Carlo out the window.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's
with
active.
With William Powell's portrayal of Godfrey, he's the one that stays level and even keeled throughout the film. And even when Irene compliments him twice toward the end, that she likes when he loses his temper, it's like, well, that wasn't really losing a temper. That was still being very factual and setting things straight and keeping things in line and fixing things the way they need to be fixed. But I think that plays really well for Godfrey to be the straight man character throughout the movie while everything else is swirling all around him.
Yeah.
All right. White Fang, thank you very much, Amy. White Fang, we have another question from... Hi, Sheila. How you doing? The dialogue was remarkable. Why wasn't the movie nominated for an Academy Award since the 4 top acting roles were?
And I think Linda answered that one, that it was. Ironically, the director, the screenwriter, and all 4 main characters were nominated for Oscars, but it wasn't nominated for Best Picture. Mm-hmm. And interesting enough, on the screenplay itself, who is it? It's Eric Hatch, who wrote the novel that it was based on, that was serialized in some magazine. And then Maury Riskind were nominated for Oscars, but really only the sort of the broad outline of what Hatch had in his story existed in the final screenplay. And even Riskind's screenplay was significantly overhauled on the set by Gregory LaCava. And the screenplay that was submitted to the Academy for consideration was actually the screenplay that shows up in the movie. So they, a day after filming was done, they took the screen, sort of a written record of what they had filmed, and that became the screenplay that was submitted. So, and LaCava got no credit for it. So there you go.
And but also, LaCava got a lot of trouble for that kind of improvising on the set from the producers, but the actors loved it. I mean, the actors could just they loved working with him. Apparently. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. And regarding the awards, it was significant that year one film received the nominations for Best Actor and Actress and Best Supporting Actor and Actress, all from one film, because that was the first year that the supporting actor and supporting actress categories had been added. So that really was a coup for one film to receive 6 nominations, especially in the 4 acting categories.
Yeah, most definitely. And you mentioned LaCava and his set, with the improvisation. And watching this, probably the second and third time this year, I actually showed it to my 17-year-old daughter earlier, last year now. And she enjoyed it a lot. But watching it just for LaCava's physical direction. So we know the improvisation that was going on before the takes, but just where his camera is and the simplicity, the simplistic manner in the way he shoots things and relies on editing to instead of camera movement. He'll edit very sharply, very crisply. And Ted, you mentioned before we got on about the Carlo imitating the gorilla scene and just the absurdity and ridiculousness of that scene. But if you get a chance, go back and watch that scene from an editing standpoint. And he bounces around the room, but it's perfectly timed where you get a reaction from Mr. Bullock. You get the mother screeching going on and on. You get Carol Lombard, wailing on the couch. And then he'll cut to Godfrey. And it's the only time Godfrey sort of breaks character in that he rolls his eyes a couple times at the absurdity of what Carlo's doing. But he captures all of that mayhem and brilliantly cuts it up so that it doesn't stay too long on any one thing. And I think that's LaCava's genius in directing Screwball, because he relies on that editing to sort of bring every person in the scene into the emotion of that scene. So
I don't know how this fits, but LaCava started off as a cartoonist. He was a cartoonist with the Hearst papers, and apparently got into the live cinema when they were starting to make movies out of the cartoons or something like that. But anyway, I'm not sure how that fits in with. He's not the most. You don't see him as a visual stylist, but the camera's always in the right place at the right time.
Well, I mean, think of each edit as a panel, as a
ways.
cartoon panel. Yeah. I mean, I actually think it plays in perfectly, Ted. of a cartoonist and look at, each cut is a panel in a cartoon,
Yeah.
and that's how you put it all together. So that's very apropos.
All right. Well, thank you, Sheila. We have another question there. Oh, hi, Amy. Again, this is another question about screwball comedies. Could Crazy Rich Asians be a similar, more recent screwballish comedy on the wealthy? Rita?
I'm thinking, I saw the question in the queue and I'm thinking about it. They do poke fun at the really way over the top wealthy. It does have the romantic aspect to it. I don't know. Does it meet all the criteria, Kevin?
I'm embarrassed to admit I've never seen Crazy Rich Asians. I know. My wife and daughters are ashamed right now. They're all cringing in the other room, I'm sure. But just from what I know of it, it would seem to, yes, that I think that, and actually, Amy makes a good point of tying it back to a comedy on the wealthy too, because that's one element I wouldn't have initially, tied it together. But yeah, I think it is a wonderful screwballish, if that's a word. If you can use a hyphen, it's a word. So I think yes.
And there's a romantic element in it, and they get together, and it all ends up being fine, and relationships, and it all does. So that would be, I agree with it. That would be a screwballish comedy. Maybe we should make a list of those for people to look at.
I know, that's a good call.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. White Fang. Okay. The film is categorized as a comedy, but there's a lot of social commentary. How did the social commentary affect the popularity of this film?
I would say not at all. It was the 10th highest box office movie of the year. We mentioned the Academy Awards. I think the social commentary is interesting, and just sort of how the sausage is made with everyone. We discuss this on our weekly call of the programming team. And we talked about the social commentary because it is an important element to this film. It's not the primary importance of this film. That's the straight up comedy. But the social commentary is important, especially given when it was released. And I went back and sort of thought about all the social elements of it. And I came to the conclusion that, and also in reading on La Cava, that it's from a very conservative standpoint, if you think about it, because it's all about self-fulfilling success, right? Godfrey lifts himself up from his bootstraps, not using his family, but his ingenuity in taking the pearl necklace and turning that into his leg up. There's the comment straight on about the family thinking that because the dad pays 60% in taxes, that's wrong, only because you should pay people you love more than you should pay the government. And there's that going back to the whole idea of it's self-determination, right? The men in the ash heap are not there by choice, but they're there by circumstance. And Godfrey even says the only difference between a derelict and a man is a job. So I think that it's all about that self-determination. Yeah, there you go, the quote and everything. That makes it that way. So it's probably gone on too long, but I'm sure you guys have something else to say about the social stuff.
Again, La Cava, it's a sort of a theme in his films, and most of his films are not very well known. But there's also this conflict between people that are disreputable backgrounds but are good people, and people that are on the straight and narrow, and them getting involved with each other, and the idea of the unemployed. I mean, you'd have to see some of his other films to really appreciate that, and they're not that well known. But they're all every film I've seen by him has some interesting parts to it. And then there was this, okay, I'll get into it. There was this strange one called Gabriel over the White House, where the president has divine intervention and solves all the world's problems by basically becoming a dictator, which is not so good. But he's out to help the people that are out of a job in the depression, and putting the government, giving them handouts and putting the energy of the country behind them. And it's kind of an interesting. It's a kind of unique film. It's a very strange film, though, that's for sure. Anyway, but that's another part of the Le Havre. Unfortunately, he was an alcoholic, so everything just fell apart for him at the end, and he didn't have a chance to really, as far as I know, didn't have a chance to really flourish in the system, even though he made some important films.
So there was this comment towards about halfway through, a little over halfway through in the movie, towards we're getting around. This is with Tom and Godfrey talking. Godfrey brings Tom down to the where Godfrey is found. But if you go back, I had showed a picture just earlier. There's the picture of the scene, the very nice scene between where Godfrey and Irene are sitting. He has asked Irene to sit down outside the cabin there, and he has a conversations with her, and she says, basically, maybe this isn't right, that we should be taking people in for scavenger hunts, the people that are, taking the poor in and using them as an object to come in. She basically is trying to says that, and they have a little discussion. That kind of sets off some of the things that should be going on in the movie, and keeps coming back and leads you to where we get to this point where Godfrey's saying this later in the movie. Even though once we have all the comedy, there is a strong social element going through the whole, that starts at the beginning, is brought up in the middle of it again, towards the middle, or a little bit to after the middle, and then comes at the end where they have the big, they've taken over and redone, and Godfrey's come back to finds himself and what he needs to do. And to me, that's a very strong social comment, I think, in the movie, that is there's comedic elements in there. I think this movie doesn't, and I think Kava, we've been talking about it, it doesn't a lot of his movies, or likes to have a point. And he was also a silent film director. What I get from a lot of the early directors and a lot of writers and stuff like that, a lot of them wanted to use the film to say a message. And I think at this time, when this film was made, we were in the Depression, okay? And a lot of people, the difference between a derelict and a man was a job. And that was just a strong line. And what this did, I think, maybe it wasn't perceived to have a lot of effect, but I think the audience could really relate to it and the message in there. Rita, anything else?
I think that this scene where Godfrey and Tommy Gray go to the dump, and Godfrey introduces him to some of the people he met there and explain their circumstances, and he wants to talk about his plan. And at that point, the audience doesn't know what the plan is. That's probably the most serious part of the film, and I think that's the director's nod to the circumstances that are happening in the country at that time. But when Godfrey is talking to Irene, both at the very beginning and at the very end at the dump, she still doesn't get it. At the beginning, she didn't really get it. And even at the end, when she's asking, are these all the forgotten men? There's so many. And Godfrey says, well, they're here for their annual reunion. And she says, well, I saw the mayor was here. He says, oh, yes, he's their guest of honor. And he's still making fun of it and making light of it because she still doesn't really get it. And even in that semi-serious poke, we still find the lightness and the humor presented there, even with the underlying message. But I do think it is there, and I think it's balanced nicely and woven into and in between the comedy that is the main goal of the film.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you, White Fang. How does the social commentary parallel to today?
Depends on your perspective.
Okay, so what's your perspective? That's the question.
If you're because if the determinism of Ayn Rand, which came how long after this, Ted? When was Rita? When was
about the same time?
Yeah. Okay.
A little bit later. Yeah.
With the 40s.
So if you're on that side of the fence, on the self-determination that big government is bad, then there are parallels in some people's political leanings today. And if you're on the big government is good and everybody deserves a helping hand, then you're on the other side. So I think there's definitely the same social parallels today. There always will be in a society where you have the haves and the have-nots for whatever reason, whether it's depression or social circumstance or anything else.
Yeah. And right now, I mean, the gap between the two was extremely magnified during the Depression. And today, from through 2020, with the worldwide pandemic, we have a widening of the gap again. We've got billionaires making billions more, and we've got people standing in line for food. So it's very, very similar to the situation in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But this is all fairy tale too. I mean, the movie. I mean,
Right.
magically, this wonderful restaurant ends up being in the dump, and it's a very successful restaurant and all that. And there's no reason why not to. I mean, in terms of the movie, that's a great way to end the thing. But there's no way that there's no comment. It all happened over a summer while the girls were in Europe or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
so, I mean,
Well-
it's all magically there, and so I mean, it really is just a fairy tale. If you try to apply any kind of political ideology to it, it's just not going to add up, and it doesn't try to. I think it has more to do with just taking people for what they are and appreciating people for who they are. And I think that's what's so great about this film and a lot of other screwball comedy stuff too, is that it's just the delight in the all these weirdo people, I mean, there's we haven't even talked about the mother yet. I forget her name, but
Alice Brady.
Angela. I think Angela. Yeah.
nutso and just talking all the time. But she really cares about her daughters. And she's, and every once in a while, she just kind of gets out of her daze and said she really cares about Irene having a problem. And of course, Irene is often just making up her little fits and starts and everything like that in order to get attention. But still, the mother cares about her too. So, and that, I think that's the real.
Well, I think let's talk about the mother for a minute. Alice Brady's the actress, and I think, and this in one of the articles I was reading today, it struck me that the author said that she's essentially, her daughters are two sides of her personality. The way that the mother is, you can certainly see how Irene became the way Irene is, right? The drama, the stream of consciousness speaking, the non sequiturs, all that. The mother gets confused about, I love the line in the auction scene where she's asking, what's a forgotten man? And someone tries to explain it to her, and she says, oh, people have the worst memories. Tying that to a forgotten man, which there's so many of those little, offshoots of what goes on in her interpretation of what's transpiring that are just genius. So you can see how Irene becomes the way she is. But there's moments too when you can see how Cornelia became the way she is as well. There's the perfect picture right there when she has the little doggy in her hand, and sort of that stereotype of the wealthy woman who's at home all day, cares more about her dogs than she does about people.
And there's Carlo too.
Yes, right. Well, right. Yes, Carlo's a little pet of hers in another way, which I also read that in the book, her and Carlo are caught kissing. So it's more apparent in the book that he's a gigolo, not just a protege. But I think that was an interesting point that the author made, that her daughters are two sides of her personality, which I think is
I think
maybe overlooked.
I think that's interesting, about because reading the book would be interesting. But with the mom, I think Irene is more like her mom, and Cornelia is more like her dad, I think. But then when we were looking at this picture with her with a puppy dog like that, do we have social commentary and how it can be relevant today, or social commentary? This could be relevant today, because don't we have this case of people in their little doggies and going out in cases and doing all this stuff and acting just like Cornelia does? I mean, not Cornelia. Her name is, the mom. Okay. The mom acts. And I think so there is social commentary, and it could parallel today. And that's why I think this film today can match up really well with modern audiences because they could see these portrayals. They recognize the humor. They recognize what's going on and see it, and just can even say it still goes on today, which it does. Okay, and I think, like you're talking about the mom here, in the scene where she's in the bed, the first scene with the tomato juice, I think is just one of the best scenes in the film. And the music going on, and the little, he's moving, but he's not moving, and the little elves and stuff that she sees, gremlins or whatever she sees through her alcohol or whatever it is, and she's using. And all that could be real today. Is this a social comedy? Could this film be today? Yeah, it probably is, because it does play out as it's very relevant to today's audience.
I mean, if you want to get a little serious about that scene, I mean, she's having the DTs. And that's pretty serious stuff, you know.
Yeah, it is. So who knows what but not just alcohol. So,
yeah.
All right.
And she had a blackout. I mean, there's no question that she had a blackout too. So
yeah. Hi, Linda. How you doing? That scene at the dump in the middle is the only breather from the insanity of the rest of the film. I found it restful. The scene where they go back to there and see it, and Tom and Godfrey are talking about, that is a peaceful scene. Yes.
Well, even in that scene, in its restfulness, right? Because it's only a 94-minute movie, there's no wasted time. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that scene. The most important of which is probably his discussion with Tommy about the club, right, and that idea. But if you notice in there's also going back to this sort of private industry helping lift people up out of their poverty, their situation, which again goes back to LaCava's, sort of determinism type element, where because Tommy, through Godfrey, provided all of the forgotten men with beans, right? So it's private industry helping, not government helping them with their food. And they even complain about all of the, we don't need all these services. And Tommy does provide that. So there's little things like that they slide into this sort of the calm amongst the storm. There's the scene of the guy who ran the Second National Bank, right? Yeah. He passes by and he tells them the benevolence of this CEO to give everything he had to his shareholders so they wouldn't suffer. Again, not all bankers are evil, as would have been portrayed in something like It's a Wonderful Life. But then, he walks by, but then he goes to his cabin and he's watering a plant, in the midst of this, this depressive environment. He's caring enough to beautify it. And I think that sort of tells what's coming from Godfrey in this sort of beautifying the space. So there's, even in that calmness, there's still a lot going on, which is what makes this film great.
Yeah, social commentary is very relevant today, I think. Yeah. For today's audience. Well, thank you, Linda. All right, White Fang has another question. Does Irene have any social redeeming qualities? Rita?
Yes. She wants to do well. She wants to be different than her family, but not too far out of her comfort zone. She actually stuck around the dump and talked to Godfrey and wanted to, know a little bit more. And even though she didn't understand everything the first time, I think her heart is in the right place, and she wants to do good things, and she wants to improve herself and wants to contribute positively to the world around her. So I think she does have redeeming qualities.
I said this the other day when we were talking about this. I worked in a psychiatric hospital for a while, and there was kind of a statement that said that the one in the hospital, the patient was being treated in the hospital, was the one sane person in the family. And I think in some ways Irene is the most sensible and has the best heart of all of them. It's just that she's in this environment where she's just she doesn't get any real. She's trying to find herself, And then at the end, like in this scene, she just steps up and tells William Powell, "We're getting married, and I brought in the groceries for a week and got everything set up here." And even though she says, "Well, is that bridge there all the time?" That kind of thing. I mean, in some ways, that she's the ideal mate for for William Powell, who's this kind of starchy character, that kind of thing. At any rate, she's just, that's Carol Lombard. And I think in most of, I don't know all her films, but in her comedies, she's just this amazing way of being nutsy at the same time, but very endearing and very beautiful, and just she's one of a kind. There's nothing like her in all of the Hollywood films.
Yeah, so I would touch on two things. So, as an answer to the original question, Irene's love for Godfrey is the only pure love in the film. If you look at the other characters, the relationships are all very, very unbalanced. You obviously have Carlo and Mrs. Bullock. You have Cornelia and what's Handsome Freddie or whatever that lackey who hangs around with her. It's very uneven. Where Godfrey and Irene's relationship, and I cast back to that scene when they're washing the dishes together, and I would imagine, because some people have argued that it's maybe not a happy ending because of sort of where they are as people, and it's very uneven, right? Because she really hasn't changed much throughout the film, but that scene when they're washing dishes really, to me, crystallizes their relationship. Yeah, there you go, right there. So it's them doing something together offhandedly, communicating, but doing it very passively, and I think that's why it's a beautiful relationship. And and we got to talk about the last line, which just stand there and be quiet, it'll all be over in a minute, is the last words of the film as they're about to get married, which is a brilliant last line. But talking about Lombard in particular and her genius, which it took a while for Hollywood to discover her. It was about 25 films that she had made before 20th Century, which really put her on the map as a premier comedienne. And they finally figured it out. And throughout the 7 years before she died in a plane crash in early 1942, 7 or 8 years anyway, was essentially the span of her significant career. So it's very short. But in those films, because she was so beautiful as a comedienne, she had no problem being silly and giving away her beauty for the sake of the role. And it's sort of her, the thing that I most love about her is that she was willing to give herself to comedy at the expense of her glamour and beauty. Now, there are exceptions in this film where there are certainly glamour shots of her, and that does carry through. But most of the actresses of the 30s would not allow themselves to, A, have those bangs that she sports through the whole film, but B, to be put in a shower and look, drowned like a wet rat. They would insist on their key lighting be at the best level to make them look more glamorous. But she's the opposite. She's willing to give up that glamour. Yeah, there's a couple shots there for the roles. And comedy was better for it, and Hollywood movies was better for it. And to me, Carol Lombard is one of the greatest, not just comedians, but one of the greatest actresses in classic Hollywood films. It's just a tragedy that she died so young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's interesting, I read about when she had passed away, because she was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and needed to fly back to California, but she was there for a war bond rally, and she raised $2 million for that one day event for her to be there. $2 million, and she got on a plane to get back, and there was a plane crash because it was a plane crash, and her mother was on board and other people. So that was a tragic loss at that time. Yeah.
So apparently, she had a social conscience too. I don't know that much about it, but she was socially. She wasn't just she wasn't the ditzy person in real life that she is portrayed in the movies the roles she played.
Well, President Roosevelt even said she was one of the.
What's that?
I was just going to say, President Roosevelt even said she was perhaps the first civilian casualty of American citizen in World War II, because she was flying back from that war bond rally. and died. I think there's another 30 airmen who were on the plane with her when they crashed outside Las Vegas.
Yeah. And you go back to this shower scene. First, he carries her up, picks her up, carries her up the stairs, brings her in, and then dumps her on the bed. And she's not doing anything. So he picks her up and throws her into the shower, and to get her to wake up, because he had seen her wake up actually. And the other thing, when I watch this scene, watched this clip over and over again like this. You can see him smiling and how much fun he might have had. I mean, I understand they were married at one time, and who knows what they were doing here and how the scene went, but it's just filmed so well and so naturally. And like you said, giving up all they could be spraying mud on her and it wouldn't make a difference, But I think this is just a really good scene of comedy for him.
Yes.
All right, how are we doing there, Sherry White Fang? William Powell provides a great performance. How popular was William Powell when this film was made? Kevin, you know probably the most about him, right?
Yeah, well, he's a very interesting actor. So in the 20s, he played villains, and then had a series of, strangely enough, detective movies. While he was at Warner Brothers, they dropped him, thought he was too old, and so they dropped him. And it's sort of like falling Forrest Gump style, falling up. He's dropped by Warner Brothers, which is the bottom of the barrel. And he's picked up by MGM, and they put him in The Thin Man with Myrna Loy, and he rockets to superstardom. The following year, he was in The Great Ziegfeld, which won Best Picture the year before this came out. So he was one of the actors who significantly benefited from when movies changed over to talkies, because he had that sophisticated delivery that he'd learned on stage. He didn't have to twirl his mustache as he did as a villain in silent movies, and he became a sophisticated gent in a lot of his performances. And he was probably second only to Clark Gable in MGM's stable in the late 30s as a male actor. So he was incredibly popular when this movie was made, and sustained his career until the mid-50s, when he made Mr. Roberts and then retired and lived for another 30 years after he retired from showbiz. So he had a great career.
Father was his another big hit of his in the
Yes.
movies, right? And they got an Academy nomination for that, I think. But I mean, he's another one of these Hollywood actors that just was like one character. I mean, if you saw William Powell in a movie, you know what to expect. I mean, he didn't have a wide range. At least I don't know of any unusual movies that he was in. He's mostly just William Powell, and that's part of what Hollywood's about. Just like Cary Grant's always Cary Grant in a movie,
Right.
I just want to jump in before I saw somebody ask what another Carol Lombard movie is, and my favorite of hers is To Be or Not to Be, the movie she made just before she died. But that's another brilliant film, Ernst Lubitsch film. But she's great in that.
Yes, and if Linda's so inclined, she can go to top10filmlist.com, where there is a top 10 list of Carol Lombard's best films.
Okay.
So,
What do you list as the top?
My Man Godfrey is the best, with To Be or Not to Be right behind it. That's a brilliant, brilliant film.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. The father is depicted as out of the loop, similar to many modern situation comedies. Was this depiction common when the film was published?
Well, yeah, I mean, here we can take a step back from the question and just mention Eugene Pallette, who plays the father with that froggy voice, who ironically died of throat cancer probably 20 years after this was made. But he started out as a thin leading man in the 20s, and for whatever reason put on a little weight and made his name in over 260 credits. So he was a very popular character actor, and I think yeah, it's always good to have the sort of the dumb dad, right? You look at Modern Family.
Good dad.
The dumb dad.
How about Clueless?
Clueless, yes, Clueless, yes, which carries through comedy because it's always the, you can have the. I mean, right now I live alone with 3 women, my wife and 2 daughters, so I can understand the wise detachment that a father must take on at certain elements when you're overwhelmed by estrogen. So
Stay tuned.
I probably said too much there, and I apologize.
Yes, you did.
but whatever.
Stay tuned for the Lady Eve, where he reprises a similar role.
Yes.
I mean, he's great. I mean, that voice and the jowls and just and he never there's no self-pity there or anything like that. He's just there. He just does his thing.
Yep.
Rita?
Yeah, I thought this was a really good question because it does parallel sitcoms where the dad is always just a little bit one step behind on what's going on, which is really unfair to dads. But it works well in comedy, and we get to see Mr. Paulette again in our next film coming in 2 weeks. So look forward to seeing him again.
Mm-hmm. All right. White Fang. We've been running down on questions. We're going to have this question, and then we'll have one more question after this here because we're running out of time. It's been a good day. Thank you very much for the participation, everybody. The opening credits become part of the movie by showing the glamour of the city and ending with the forgotten men. Was this all done on a stage set with custom lights? Kevin, you're our expert on this.
I think it would have to be.
Right.
But it's a beautiful, pan over if you remember that where it starts and then ends up in the dump. So yeah, I would assume it was all on a soundstage. The interesting thing though is if you watch the first scene, there's visible breath as the 2 characters talk, as Lombard and Powell talk. So I'm curious if that was either on a very cold soundstage or if it was indeed outside somewhere. And I couldn't find anything in any of the reading that I did on the film to indicate that it was shot outside. So it was just a cold day, a cold night in Hollywood.
My thought of it was that it was all soundstage because they didn't have digital. Those you see reflections when the lights come on in the floor, the stage floor, and then it pans around like he's looking at the city. Then it goes over to the other part of the city where the dump is, and that scene, like on the lower right there, that picture there, that could be set on a stage set, just all graphics. That looks very artistic. But when they actually go back into it, I actually think they did actually go to a set because when they do later on, but also at the very beginning, you notice they're dumping cans down. I think that's all live. And I also wonder how many empty cans did they buy? Okay, how many truckloads did they have, and how often did they have to redo that scene or fill the place up and make it look like? Because it sounded like it was all cans coming out. There wasn't actually garbage; it was just all cans coming out of a truck. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that's what they did. And this is like one of the. It's a good question or topic because this is really one of the better graphic and designed and leads you into the first question again about what's going on at the time, more of a social picture, asking what's going on here, how is this working, and everything else. And you meet Godfrey, and you meet the 2 ladies who appear up and want to take him off for a scavenger hunt. So this is really beautiful, and I do think, Kevin, that it is a stage set, and then they might have continued with a stage set to keep the graphics looking good, because then when they get closer, the next shot is outlined. I think they filmed the shots when they're outside, maybe at nighttime, because it was easier to film at nighttime. It was going to be quieter and everything else, but they filmed and you could see the breath at nighttime. So I kind of think that was, but it's unusual for them to go out. But as being a silent film director, they did things on sites and they took cameras and they did things. And so I could see that.
This thing on the right here, what happens is it's a drawing to begin with, and then it fades into the live action.
Right.
I'm almost willing to think that it's all the whole thing's pretty much animated, but that's the way I feel and drawing and all that kind of thing. But I don't know. It's what I like about it is it is what it is. I mean, it's just this, it's a very original. It really gives you a sense of I don't know, something different than before.
All right.
Before we leave, I just got to say, the Le Carver and W.C. Fields were good buddies. They were good drinking buddies. Just a little footnote in history, and as Kevin pointed out earlier, that apparently Le Carver helped W.C. Fields set up his stream screen persona. So,
all right.
And Fields called Le Carver the best comedy mind in Hollywood, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're ready for our last question here. And this last question is for our panelists, but we also want to ask our viewers and those who are going to watch this as a recording also to think about this question. Would you see a screwball comedy today? Let's start with Rita.
I would say if it stays as light and fluffy and silly as the classic screwball comedies are, I would say yes, we definitely need them today.
How about Kevin?
I am going to see Crazy Rich Asians. So yes.
And I would say I'm like digging back in the history of the 30s and see the ones that are already there, and things that you've never seen before, and then these same talents putting all their talent, making other great screwballs that we've never heard of before.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. We're running out of our time, but we'd like to just say goodbye to you all here today, and want to remind you that we would like you to, if possible, to subscribe to the Bay Theater YouTube channel. If you go out to the Bay Theater inside of go to YouTube and go to look for the Bay Theater, you'll see a little yellow subscribe button. And then when you log back in, you'll always have, say, you're subscribed to it, and a little bell that means you can turn on notifications. If you turn on notifications, you get it when we post a new video or are going to do something new or anything else, you'll be able to see it there. So please do that. And we just want to remind you that we'll be back in 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks. 2 weeks for The Lady Eve, another comedy. It's a screwball comedy. It's very, like they said in here, bewitched and bewildered, with Barbara Stanwyck and Henry Fonda. You can view this over the next 2 weeks just go to justwatch.com. That's where these different icons are showing where you can rent it or buy the movie to watch it. Take your time to watch it. And then we'll be back in 2 weeks at 7:30 p.m. Tuesday, February 23rd, to see you again and talk about this film. So thank you everybody for being here tonight, and have a nice day, and have a happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.